we've got some tomatoes to start. I'm going to share with you how I start mine, and then we'll strategize for you. And I do have a special offer, but I'm going to save that until the very end, so I only take your time if you're interested. So let's get started. We're going to start just like we did with the lettuce. If you caught the lettuce video that I shot for you, you'll know that I actually start with meal prep trays instead of the traditional cell trays. And we're going to start the exact same way with some mycorrhizal fungi. So mycorrhizal fungi, it has that beneficial relationship with the roots of the plant. So I use an inoculant to just go ahead and get that relationship started before they ever head out to the garden. And the fungi acts like a sponge and almost like an extra root system for the plant, while the plant's helping the fungi out as well. So that's how we start. And then we're going to be making soil blocks again. So I have my Fisker's soil block maker, and I'm using cocoa coir to fill it. And so just like if you haven't caught the lettuce video, you'll probably want to watch that one and pick up all the details there. But I just use straight cocoa coir to make my soil blocks. Nothing else in it at all. It's just a block of cocoa coir that I rehydrate, and it makes it just the perfect consistency to make soil blocks. And I happen to have a fresh batch that I ran out and had to make another batch, and so it's working up just fine. Sometimes there will be just a little bit of water that squeezes out, and there may be, there's a couple drops coming out, but not too much. And that's just about right. So we've got our first blocks. And then I'm just going to set those over so I can get 12 soil blocks in a tray. And my soil block maker makes 4 at a time. So if you haven't made soil blocks before, this is all there is to it. If you can work Play-Doh, you can make soil blocks. I have not tried one of the metal ones. In fact, I had stayed away from soil blocks for a while because they made it sound like you had to have this fancy special mixture that you bought from them, and then the metal makers themselves were kind of pricey, and so I had stayed away from it. But then I found this guy, and I tried just straight cocoa coir to see what would happen, and it was fine. Now I do have to fertilize because the cocoa coir does not have any fertilizer in it, which is also one of the great things about it. If you've had to deal with fungus gnats or other diseases with your seedlings ever, when fertilizer is in those bags of seed starting mix at the store, it tends to attract those things. In fact, once you've had the experience with it, if you go to a store, especially a little bit later in the season, you'll even notice gnats like flying around the bags of mix in the garden center home improvement stores. So that's one of the nice things about cocoa coir is it's sterile, which is also why we have to fertilize later. But to start with, it's going to be sterile. And yes, I still get gnats that like come in through my windows, and I hang some fly paper next to my seed starting rack, and that helps with those. But as far as having larvae in the mix itself, I'm not having to worry about that. All right, so here we go with the last set. And so if I was doing this commercially, I would probably need a bigger sort of soil block maker. But for just a personal small family garden, I've got 12 soil blocks ready to go, which is going to be plenty to work with for today. So clean up my hands and we'll get some seeds going. And the great thing about starting your own is you've got so many more varieties that you can choose from than what you'll find at the garden center. This one happens to be called Queen of the Night. And tomato seeds look just like the seeds out of a tomato when you eat it, because that's what they are. So when I'm on my A game, I actually have some of my own saved from the year before, but we're trying some different kinds right now. And um, tomato seeds get planted at 1/4 of an inch depth. So if you saw the last video with my soil block maker, you'll know that we have perfect little 1/4 inch divots in the top of each soil block. And so that's what we're going to drop down into. And it's a fresh pack of seeds. I'm going to put 2 tomato seeds in each one of those. So yes, things will get thinned out later, most likely, but putting 2 seeds in a block guarantees that, well, comes closer to a guarantee that we should get germination in each one of those blocks then, because 100% germination, probably not going to happen. So this way we know that we've got a backup in every single one of our seed cells then. All right, so tomato seeds in, and then they're getting planted at 1/4 inch depth. So I just grabbed my cocoa coir and put a little on the top of each one, and they're down in there at 1/4 inch depth then. So just a light tap on each one of those. It's going to make sure we've got good seed to soil contact so that we have the moisture that's in here gets held against our seed, because you can actually germinate seeds in a damp paper towel. It's not the dirt, it's not the soil that makes things germinate. It's the moisture. So that's what we want to make sure is held against there. All right, so we've got those all covered up. And I do not need to water these. So if you used a different method of using one of the cell trays, and if you had a bag of soil mix, then you might find that yours is drier and you're needing to mist things a little bit, and you could do that. But mine has enough moisture in it right now. I should not need to water this at all for the first week. And at least the way my house runs, I'll have plenty of moisture held in here. And then after that, I'm going to start monitoring things, and I will water around each cell so that things are getting bottom watered then. And so one of the reasons that's going to hold its moisture well is I am going to put a lid on it like a humidity dome. I don't need one of those big fancy humidity domes, because this only stays on, and I do leave a corner propped, this only stays on until things germinate. So after things have germinated, I'll usually open it up and wipe the top of the lid just a little bit, and then leave it propped for a day. And after that, the lid comes completely off. So these are ready to go. And I am going to put a label on mine before I set it down so I don't forget. But these will go on a heat mat for me. You can get tomatoes to germinate without a heat mat, but you might find your germination is a little spottier and it will probably take longer. And I do have a thermostat with my heat mat as well, because I found that it needs to cycle on and off a little bit to maintain a good temperature for things. So does go on the heat mat, but it only goes on the heat mat until things have germinated. Once you have your baby tomatoes, the heat mat goes off. So your house should be a fine temperature for things. You just want to make sure that, so they're not going to need to stay on the heat. You just have to watch with tomatoes. They can't get down past 45 degrees for several days in a row. So that's one reason they're a warmer season plant. So in your house should be fine, and then into a greenhouse if you have one, or protected area until they're ready to plant out then. And another thing about the heat mats, so something to consider is I don't want to be mixing in a bunch of different types of plants with my tomatoes. So if you get one of those big cell trays, then you're not going to want to have lettuce with tomatoes in there. It's not going to work well because the lettuce has no heat. The tomatoes need heat, for example. So that's another reason these trays have worked out to be just an excellent size, because I can deal with just the amount of plants that I want in each of these, and kind of manage them separately according to their heat and moisture and times and all of those things. So keep that in mind as you're planting. You can put more than one kind of tomato in each tray and just make sure that you label, but I wouldn't want to put lettuce in here, or something that takes a long time like celery would not work with these. So something to consider about your heat mats. And then we're going to talk about one more thing today. We're going to talk a little strategy here before that we go, and see if we can get you set up for success this year. And for our strategy, you're going to want your calendar, because there are two dates that you need to know: the first frost date of fall and your last frost date of spring. So if you don't know those yet, go ahead and pause me for just a minute and do a quick internet search. You can find it several places. The Old Farmer's Almanac is a common place. I'm pretty sure by zip code you can look things up on that one. But we're going to use those dates for the fall one. I'm going to help you figure out when the latest is you could plant your tomatoes. And then the earliest you can always plant them is based on your last frost date of spring. So do keep in mind when you look these up, they are just averages. You're not guaranteed that things stop and start on those dates, but you need those two dates, and then we're ready for the next piece. Then whatever tomato you're wanting to start, you want to find it in the seed catalog or look at your packet that you have and find the days to maturity or days to harvest. And just a tip, whenever you're looking at anything that you're wanting to plant, those days to maturity or days to harvest can be from seeding or from transplant. So you'll always want to make note of that also. And for tomatoes, it almost always lists it from transplant, because you can put a tomato seed just straight out in the garden. And in fact, they come up around the compost pile. So you can start a tomato seed anywhere. But generally, the practice is, because of how long they take to grow and just the ease of being able to bury them a little bit deeper as you start them, they're generally transplanted as a practice. So we need days to maturity. What that is telling you then is, from the time you put that plant in the ground, how long it is before it's going to bear its first fruit. And just scanning tomatoes, there are a lot of different days to maturity that can be found. They range from 60, 70, all the way up to even 90 days that it's going to take to bear that first fruit. So we're going to figure out together when the latest is that you could plant your tomatoes. And I'm going to do an example here using a fall frost date of October 15th. So you're going to know yours. But just to help you see how it works, I'm going to use October 15th as our frost date for this example. And let's say for our example, we want at least 6 weeks of tomatoes, because that fall frost date, that's when things are going to end. So if I don't get my first tomato until October 15th, then I only got one tomato. It probably wasn't worth it to put that in the garden, although you might argue otherwise, that one would be worth it. But I want at least 6 weeks of tomatoes to make it worthwhile. So 6 weeks before October 15th would mean I want my tomatoes producing by the first week of September. So that's now the date that we have in mind. First week of September is when we want our fruits to start forming. And we looked at those days to maturity, and there were several different ones to choose from. I'm going to go with a 70 days to maturity for this example. And that would be the same as 10 weeks. And remember, that's from the time the plant goes into the ground. How long is it before it starts producing fruit? It would be 70 days, which is the same as 10 weeks. So the only math that you have to do is to be able to count backwards from our first week of September that we're aiming for. Counting backwards 10 weeks is going to put us at the last week of June. So last week of June is when you would have to transplant. Now, we're not done yet, although that does tell you if you were getting a transplant from the store. If you had that transplant in the ground by the last week of June, in theory, you could have tomatoes by the first week of September if it's a 70 days to maturity type plants. So last week of June is when you need to transplant. If you are starting your own seeds, there's one more count back you have to do. We need to go backwards another 6 to 8 weeks before that, which is going to put us at the middle of May is when you would need to seed. So in theory, that is the latest that you could seed. So you're going to have to let us know in the comments. You get to be a hero with your knowledge. If you have done tomatoes that late and had success, let us know. I usually have mine in before that. May's the latest that I transplant things for me, but this is your chance to let us know if this is in theory when you could make things work. Middle of May to seed, last part of June to transplant, and then that would mean you're producing by the first week of September. So let's see if that works for you. Or if you wanted to go the other direction and maximize your growing season, then that last spring frost date is the one you would need to know. And you're just going to transplant on, or I usually go a little bit after that date. And 6 to 8 weeks before that is when you would sow your seeds then. So you could start then for the earliest, or anywhere in between there and the previous example we looked at. Now, as you're figuring things out for yourself, the good news is there are faster tomatoes if you happen to be in a shorter growing season or you're just running later in the season. So those days to maturity that we looked at, there are the cherry types of tomatoes. They will mature faster because you've got a little tomato instead of one of those big ones that you're having to get ready to go. So that just makes sense. So cherry types might be a possibility. I've also had something labeled as a cocktail tomato that matured closer to that 55-day range. And then determinate tomatoes also mature a little bit quicker. So I can fill you in on what that word means if you don't know. Anytime with seed starting, like if there's a word you don't know, it actually is probably having useful information that you want to look up. So you don't have to look it up because I'm going to tell you. So determinate tomatoes have a determined or fixed fruiting time frame. Basically, the tomato writes the contract and says, I will produce tomatoes from here to here. And that's my window of tomato production. That's it. So they are usually fastest to fruit and they're bushier, which means they are good for containers. They're not going to need as much support. Indeterminate tomatoes are the opposite. They do not have a fixed fruiting season. In other words, they fruit all season until frost or something else tells them they're done. So determinate, the tomato seed itself determines this is when I produce fruit. Indeterminate's going to produce all season. Other things to know about indeterminate, it is slower to start fruiting. So it's those longer days to maturity that we saw. And they also have longer vines, which means they're going to need support and they are generally pruned as well. So determinate versus indeterminate, you have it if you did not know yet. All right, so you have some information that you should have to get your plan set up for your tomatoes. And I don't know, anybody else like me get stuck in black and white thinking ever? Just me? Um, you don't have to start them all from seed, or you don't have to give up on tomatoes at all. What if you got some starts from the store this year and then tried some from seed yourself and see what you can mix and match and play with? So that might be an option for you. And I would love to see you start at least some of your own seeds this year. I'd mentioned to you in several other videos that I was working on a seed starting quick course for you to share what I know and to get you up and running in as little as a week, depending on how fast you can get your materials. And that course is available on my website, theimaginegarden.com. And even if you don't have your perfect bed setup or container set up yet, you can still get those first seeds started so that when you do have those other things ready, your transplants are ready for you and you've got that little bit of jump on the season. So I also mentioned that I had a special for you, and that is the code START15. and that will get you an extra 15% off the course price on my website. And it is for a limited time, just until I get my founding course owners in, because I'm trying to get as many of you up and running as quickly as we can and get you some success for this season. So theimaginegarden.com, I hope to see you there.